Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tom Brock, and I am the director of the Community College Research Center at Teachers College, Columbia University. And I'm here today with good colleagues from the Public Policy Institute of California, and also from Wheelhouse, the Center for Community College Leadership and Research at the University of California, Davis. We are here together to talk with you about findings from a national survey that we conducted to learn how community colleges have spent their pandemic relief funds, and also to have a conversation about what is next for community college now that those relief funds are officially over. Just to provide a very short background, as you may recall, back in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic really burst on the scene in the United States, it was a very frightening time. There obviously was the immediate public health crisis, but there was also a real concern about the economic fallout from the COVID pandemic and how it would affect the entire US economy. In response, Congress passed the CARES Act and subsequent legislation, which, among other things, provided important relief funds for higher education institutions in this country to help them manage the very real challenge of students not being able to come to campus, dealing with the health issues that they faced quite immediately, and also enabling them to adjust by providing online instruction and services to students during this critical time. So together, PPIC, that is the Public Policy Institute of California, the Wheelhouse, and the Community College Research Center worked together to compile a survey to understand what community colleges did in response to the crisis, how they used the federal emergency relief funds that were made available, and particularly now that those relief funds are over, to get their views on what some of the challenges and issues might be as we move into this post-pandemic period. We have two reports in which our findings from our national survey are available. The first on the right captures findings from 6 states, which include California, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Tennessee, and Texas, to look at their experiences and draw conclusions that we think apply probably to community colleges across the country. Together, those 6 states represent close to half of all community college students in this country. On the left, you see a second report that was produced by the Public Policy Institute of California that really does a deep dive into the experience of California community colleges. Both of these reports are available on our website, which is available through a link in the chat. You can also Google ARC Network, which stands for Accelerating Recovery in Community Colleges Network, to obtain these reports at any time. So if you move to the next slide, quickly you can see our agenda for today's webinar. Serena Klempen at CCRC will begin with a national survey overview, and she will be followed by Olga Rodriguez from PPIC to talk more in depth about the California survey. Following their presentations, I will be leading a moderated discussion with the leaders of 3 community colleges who will share their campus experiences and help us think about what they're doing locally to prepare for this post-pandemic period and to take advantage of some of the lessons perhaps that were learned during the COVID time. We will then allow a little bit of time at the end for Q&A with our panelists and our research team. So we hope you will stay with us for the entire hour. If you go to the next slide, you can see all of our presenters and panelists. Again, we'll start off with short presentations by our 2 lead researchers, Serena Klempen and Olga Rodriguez. Then I'm very happy to welcome 3 community college leaders for this moderated discussion. They include Dr. Edward Bush, who's president of Cosumnes Community College in California, Johanna Williams, who's vice president for academic affairs and workforce development at Nashville State Community College in Tennessee. And then thirdly, Linda Villanueva, who's president of Lee College in Texas. So without further ado, Serena, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today. My name is Serena Klempen. I'm a research associate at CCRC, and I will present the overview of findings from our national survey. And this has very much been a team effort. So in addition to Tom, I would like to thank my coworkers and team members from the survey project, Tia Monahan, Sarah Griffin, Megan Anderson, and Beth Kopko. So first, because as Tom mentioned, the survey primarily focused on understanding how colleges used the money they received through the Federal Higher Education Emergency Relief or HERE Fund. I wanted to start by highlighting a few important parts about it. So first, in contrast to most federal aid, it went directly to colleges. Colleges did not have to submit proposals or apply. Second, the amount of aid colleges received was based on a formula that was largely tied to enrollment. And third, again, in contrast with most federal aid, colleges had a great deal of flexibility in how they could use the funds. About half of the funds were distributed as institutional aid for colleges to use for critical infrastructure, such as purchasing technology supplies, investing in health and safety measures, and maintaining facilities. The other half of the funds were distributed as emergency student aid. Within those areas, colleges had a fair amount of discretion in deciding how to use the funds. And fourth, we believe the limited guidelines pose both an opportunity and that they allowed colleges more autonomy in identifying their institutions' most critical funding needs, but also a potential challenge if colleges were uncertain about what was and was not an allowable use of funds. And so really the survey was intended to serve three purposes. First, we wanted to gain deeper insight into community colleges' experiences with the HERE Fund. Altogether, community colleges received $25 billion over 3 years. For comparison, the last big federal investment in community colleges, the TACT program, invested just $2 billion over 4 years. Because this was such an unprecedented investment in community colleges, and because colleges had so much flexibility in how to use the funds, we believe there was a great deal to learn from how colleges decided to spend the funds they were receiving. And second, to truly gain meaningful insight into how the HERE Fund worked, we believed it would be crucial to hear directly from colleges about their priorities and challenges. And ultimately, we hope to use these insights to provide timely feedback to state and federal policymakers. Okay, and here's just a map showing our survey states. As Tom mentioned, CCRC conducted the survey in 5 states: Michigan, New York, Ohio, Tennessee, and Texas. And our partners at PPIC conducted the survey in California. And together, these 6 states serve around 2.4 million students, representing over 40% of students nationwide. And these states are also very diverse with respect to student demographics, college governance structures, and campus settings, providing a very rich sample. So we were very fortunate to have support conducting the survey from partners in each of those states, and you'll see them listed here for the 6 states. And then just to provide context before jumping into findings, I wanted to share our survey response rate. So we were thrilled to have 170 colleges from across all 6 states complete the survey. And that represented an overall response rate of 64%. So it's a quick preview. Here are the main topics that I'll be covering. They include how colleges used HERE funds, how colleges targeted funds to support specific target populations, changes in the availability of college supports due to HERE funds, colleges' perceptions of how successful funds were, and concerns moving forward. So how did colleges use the aid they received? First, we thought it was important to highlight that colleges spent nearly all of the funds they received. 96.5% of student aid and 84.1% of institutional aid. Given the large amount of funding, the potential for uncertainty around the flexibility of the funding guidelines, and the fact that colleges were operating under multiple crises during the pandemic, the fact that colleges spent nearly all the funds they received is noteworthy. And these numbers also may have gone up slightly depending on the reporting period colleges were using for the survey and if they requested a no-cost extension. And here, this graph illustrates the most frequent expenditures in terms of the number of colleges reporting spending funds in each category. So you can see the most frequent expenditures were for campus safety, technology, equipment and supplies, and distance education supplies. So all kinds of things supporting that big pivot to online learning. And then this graph represents the largest expenditures in terms of the amount of aid spent in each category. So the largest expenditures were recovering lost revenue due to reduced enrollment, other additional student aid, and campus safety. And one thing that really stood out to us looking at expenditures in both these ways was the number of colleges devoting a significant amount of institutional aid to providing additional student aid. So while the federal government encouraged this use of aid, it wasn't required. And the previous slide, even though it wasn't one of the top three, there were still around 70% of colleges in our sample, 120 colleges, using institutional aid for student aid, and it was the third largest expense overall. So next, how do colleges target supports? A few different points indicate that colleges were most concerned about targeting support to students with financial needs and those experiencing basic needs and security. For one, the vast majority of colleges, nearly 90%, varied the amount of student aid they provided at least some of the time based on the student's level of need, providing a larger amount to those with greater needs. Colleges that varied the amount of aid used three main criteria to do that. Eligibility for Pell Grants and other financial aid, estimated family contribution from the FAFSA, and students' confirmation of their eligibility. And then second, when asked a general question about whether colleges provided pandemic-related supports to all students or targeted supports to students with the greatest needs, 43% replied that they targeted support, and of those, 51% indicated that they focused on students experiencing homelessness, 46% on students experiencing food insecurity, and 45% on students with migrant status. And so what do expenditure patterns reveal about how needs changed over time? One way we looked at changes over time was in terms of which services colleges already had in place prior to receiving HERE funds and which services they plan to continue after the end of HERE funds. So compared to services in place prior to the pandemic, HERE funds had the biggest impact on the number of colleges supporting students with technology hardware, high-speed internet, and housing assistance. The areas with smaller increases were those for which larger numbers of colleges had supports in place prior to the pandemic. So the most common supports prior to the pandemic were food pantries, followed by mental health services, emergency student aid, and health services. Okay. And then how successful did colleges perceive funds to be? So colleges did report some challenges in using HERE funds, notably supply chain issues and a lack of response from students. But most colleges reported aid was very to somewhat successful at addressing a range of issues. So colleges reported that student aid was the most successful at covering students' expenses related to disruptions caused by the pandemic. 86% of colleges reported aid was either somewhat or very successful with for this purpose, with over half reporting that it was very successful. And the next most successful use of student aid was for mitigating severe hardships such as homelessness or hunger. And the most successful uses of institutional aid were covering the costs associated with instructional delivery changes, increased technological efficiency, and improving campus health and safety. And between roughly 75 to 80% of colleges reported aid was very successful for each of those purposes. And finally, what do colleges' concerns about the end of HERE funds reveal about how to prioritize future funding? So the vast majority of colleges, 89%, were concerned about the end of HERE funds. And much more than other possible concerns, they were worried about their ability to continue supporting students experiencing financial or personal emergencies and reductions in their ability to provide non-academic supports. And looking ahead, colleges' top priorities for future funding reflect their concerns about assisting students experiencing financial needs and providing non-academic supports, with the two top priorities being additional emergency aid to students and mental health services. The prioritization of student aid also likely reflects the fact that colleges viewed it as such a successful strategy for supporting students during the pandemic. And one final note is that mental health services were the only expenditure that increased in frequency each of the 3 years HERE funds were offered, reflecting growing awareness of students' mental health challenges. And so now I will turn things over to Olga to discuss the survey findings in California.
Great. Thank you so much, Serena. Greetings, everyone. My name is Olga Rodriguez, Director of the PPAC Higher Education Center. It's a pleasure to be here to dive deeper into California survey findings. I'll say that the California survey study is joint work with research associates Daniel Payares Montoya and Kevin Cook. And I also want to send a special thank you to all the colleges who participated in the survey. This research would not be possible if they had not taken their precious time during commencement season and the summer months to complete this survey. And I don't have to take too much time with motivation. Tom and Serena set this up very nicely. So I'll jump in to say that in an effort to support institutions in weathering the pandemic, the federal government gave California community colleges over $4 billion as part of the HER funds. And so for today's presentations, I'll focus on the findings from our survey that show how they use this unprecedented infusion of funds to help spur innovation that helped ensure college was more affordable for students. And so I began with a pair of quotes that take a closer look at institutions' perceptions of how successful these investments were. And so for the California survey, we added a couple of open-ended questions that allowed colleges to reflect on the most successful strategies that they implemented to support student enrollment, student success, and student equity. And so across these three areas, we found that investments that help make college more affordable were perceived to be the most successful. And the quotes here are emblematic of these types of responses. And they illustrate that the role played by emergency aid, debt forgiveness, as well as addressing the challenges posed by basic needs, as well as the transition to online learning by providing technology. Next slide. And so the primary way colleges help make college more affordable was by providing direct emergency aid to students. And so by the end of January 2023, the California community colleges received a total of $1.8 billion of federal funds aimed to go directly to students. And so you might ask, how did they distribute and determine eligibility for this aid? And so we find that most colleges used FAFSA to determine eligibility, and this included using Pell status as well as the expected family contribution. And we also found that when distributing aid, equity was more important than equality. And what we might mean by this is that between 2020 and 2023, most colleges reported that they provided an amount that varied based on students' needs or circumstances, as opposed to offering the same amount to all students. And so this contrasts with 13% of colleges, which indicated that they always provided the same amount of emergency aid to all eligible students. And indeed, most colleges used financial need as the key determinant when distributing supports and aid for students. And here, I show that when we look by Pell status, full-time Pell versus full-time non-Pell, we do see a difference of about $200 in the amount of aid received. Next slide. And so with the survey, we also aim to understand how the funding supported institutions. And so by the end of January 2023, colleges in California had received a total of $2.4 billion in institutional aid. And so this figure presents the activities where over 75% of colleges invested in. And as you see here, and as the quotes reveal, the top investments included those that helped the colleges and students transition to an online environment, as well as transition back to in-person teaching and learning. And then I also want to highlight that 3/4 of colleges also reported using some of their own institutional aid to provide additional aid. And this aligns well with what Serena shared earlier. Next slide. Another way that colleges help make college more affordable and accessible was by discharging unpaid student fines and fees. And here we find that most colleges use pandemic recovery funds to discharge unpaid fees, and most used institutional aid to support these efforts, as well as a combination of institutional and student aid. And as you see from this quote, through our open-ended questions, we also learned that this approach was actually used to help re-engage students. So given that some of these fines and fees are actually things like unpaid tuition or library fines or parking tickets, actually may block some students from registering or re-enrolling. Next slide. As we look ahead, the survey also helps shed light on college plans for online courses, as well as their views on sustaining some of these investments. And here we found that HEERF dollars, using HEERF dollars to support the online transition was key, especially given that 60% of colleges expected to offer 40% or more of their colleges online moving forward. However, when we asked about sustaining future investments, we actually found that over a quarter of the colleges indicated that they will no longer offer free or reduced price internet. Something to consider as the expansion of online continues. We also saw and found that most colleges expect to maintain supports addressing food insecurity and mental health at a same or expanded level. And the state or local government were identified as a primary source for sustaining these services and supports moving forward. Emergency aid was also expected to continue, but 63% indicated that they would do so at a reduced level. And a notable difference that emerges in terms of how are they going to support this moving forward is that 43% of colleges indicated that they expected to support emergency aid through the institution's college foundations. Next slide. So now I conclude with a set of recommendations derived from our research. And they generally fall into these three primary buckets. And the first is to prioritize investments that address affordability and access. And this includes finding ways to support emergency aid, discharging unpaid fees, no-cost textbooks, free or loan technology, as well as housing, food, or childcare assistance. And in California right now, we are in a volatile budget situation. There's a projected multi-billion-dollar deficit. And so moving forward, it's going to be really important to braid or bundle multiple programs or supports to help address these affordability concerns. Things like increasing access to federal programs like HealthFresh, Medi-Cal, or other subsidized childcare programs are going to be very important. And for emergency aid, boosting the capacity of college foundations will also be key. And second, it will be important to ensure ongoing investments that support equitable access and success in online courses. Given that nearly 60% of colleges in California expect to offer 40% or more of their courses online, it will be important to ensure that ongoing investments ensure that students have equitable access to these online courses, as well as supports to ensure they're successful. Things like free or reduced price internet, access to online services and supports, as well as training for faculty teaching these courses. And the third is to evaluate the effects of these investments. And I'm pleased to know that the ARC team is working hard to contribute to these efforts. And this concludes my presentation, and I'll hand it back to Tom for our discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Olga and Serena. Really great overview of the findings from our survey work. As we move into the next session, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge our funder, the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education, which supported all of this work through the auspices of the ARC network. And of course, the findings, the opinions represented here are those of the research team and not necessarily those of IES or the Department of Education. So now I would like to invite our three panelists to join me, and we'll have more of a discussion about what these funds really look like on the ground from your perspective as college leaders, and to hear a little bit more about some of the choices you made, why you made those choices, and what your thoughts are about the future now that we no longer have these federal funds to take advantage of. So just to get us started, I think it would really help to know a little bit about the context of each of your institutions. You're in very different parts of the country, different sizes of institutions, different demographics. Dr. Villanueva, perhaps you could start and tell us a little bit about your institution.
Sure. So Lee College is located about 25 miles east of Houston, and we are near the Ship Channel and Galveston Bay. Our service area represents both rural and urban metropolitan populations in an area that has experienced some explosive economic development within the petrochemical and healthcare sectors, as well as serving more than 220,000 residents. We're a medium-sized college and serve close to 9,000 credit students, 60% who are transfer seeking, 40% who are pursuing workforce credentials. 80% of our students are part-time, probably not unlike many of our colleagues. Last spring, when we surveyed our students, 74% of them identified as having at least one unmet basic need. We are designated as a Hispanic serving institution. We have 2 campuses and 2 early college high schools located in Baytown, a satellite center located in nearby Liberty, and at our Huntsville Center, we are the largest provider of education to the incarcerated in Texas and second largest in the nation.
Thank you so much for that overview. That will help us, I think, situate your remarks in a few minutes. Dr. Williams, if I could turn to you and ask for a similar description of Nashville State Community College.
Yes, thank you. Nashville State Community College is located in Nashville, Tennessee, but we have extended campuses in different cities and counties. We serve about 7 counties in the Middle Tennessee region. We have about 6,900 students that are enrolled at Nashville State. Nashville State is among the most diverse colleges in the state, and so we serve a very diverse student population. We have about 51% full-time and about 49% part-time students, so it's about half and half there. And we serve urban and rural populations as well at the college. Most of our students are enrolled on ground. We have students online, we have students who are virtual, so they join us from different means. We have about 64% of our students are female, and the remaining students are male, and a mix of about 45% white, 30% African-American, and then we have the Hispanic students. So it's a very diverse college.
I should say thank you for that overview. Dr. Bush, then similar question for you. Tell us about your college.
Yes, good morning from California, and thank you for having me on this esteemed panel for today. Cosumnes River College is located in South Sacramento, borders Sacramento and Elk Grove. We are the 9th most diverse community college in the nation. We are a HSI and a PZ, and pending California legislation, we will have the designation of also being a Black serving institution by having more than 10% of our population being African American. Average age of our student population is 25. We are part of the Los Rios Community College District that has 4 colleges, and we are the 2nd largest community college district in the state, only second to Los Angeles Community College District. And so that's a little bit about our institutions. 15,000 students head count is the size of our college. But looking forward to providing some more detail about our institution as integrated in some of my responses that we'll talk about later.
Fantastic. Thank you for that background. Okay, well, for our first question, I'd like to kind of go back to that issue that both Serena and Olga emphasized about the flexibility that these federal emergency relief funds offered your institutions. We know that there were some key objectives you had to meet. Certainly, you had to try to keep staff and faculty employed during this time. So, just keeping the lights on even was important. Providing the cash aid to students, but also the flexibility you had to do other special initiatives, perhaps to focus in on particular needs or issues at your college that may have even been there before the pandemic. I would love to hear each of you talk a little bit about what choices you made, specifically taking advantage of some of the flexibility of HERE funds. So Dr. Bush, why don't we stick with you and then we'll go in reverse order.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, the flexibility was quite helpful. At the same time, it did provide some challenges, right? As colleges try to best figure out, like our college, of what the most impact that dollars could have. I think part of the CRC story with our HERE funding was really around how did this fit within our particular college ethos. So we have a changed paradigm that has several principles, and one of those principles is implement with sustainability in mind from the beginning. And the nature of funding being one-time dollars, at the face of it, proved to be challenging to that particular type of ethos or that approach. And so while we definitely did avail ourselves of much of the traditional ways that you saw colleges using dollars to counsel student debt, for example, to provide direct aid, to provide laptop, Wi-Fi connections, we were challenged because what would happen to the next group of students that come in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the line? What would be in place to better support those students? And so with that idea of trying to chase down sustainability with using one-time dollars, we decided to make a significant investment to be what we call the first to be a zero textbook cost institution. So we set the goal in fall of 2022 to be a zero cost textbook college, meaning that we didn't want any of our students who come to our institution to have to pay for a book. Now, mindful at that time that we set that goal or made that declaration, only 15% of our courses were OER or ZTC. So we put a significant investment providing stipends to our faculty to convert their courses to OER or ZTC. We actually set 3 standards around that. One was to convert their courses. Secondly was that if you're going to look at your course reference material, let's make it culturally relevant. So that was the second prong, and the third prong was around accessibility. As a spring, and that was a $5,000 investment per faculty members. All faculty members were able to participate, even if you had courses that were already OER ZTC. Your responsibility was to update that around those 2 other prongs and provide support to your faculty colleagues to help them in that conversion. As of this past spring, 75% of all of our courses were OER ZTC. So just a matter from the fall of 22 to this past spring made significant leaps with that. And that is having and will have a lasting impact on the students in terms of mitigating much of the financial challenges and hurdles our students face. In California, textbooks cost is the greatest cost associated with enrolling in our colleges because of the low fees that we have. So the idea was to have something that was sustainable, and that will have a lasting impact on the institution and the students that we serve.
Can I just ask you, did you set that goal for OER pre-pandemic? Was that something that the college was already paying attention to, or did this come on your radar after the pandemic hit?
Came on the radar in the midst of the pandemic. Like I said, we had very little conversation and investment in OER prior to that. That's why we were low, with the lowest even within our own district at that 10 to 15% number. And so it was really something that we was able to push and really use the pandemic to leverage as part of the case making necessary to make this a reality for our college.
Okay. Thank you. So Dr. Williams, over to you. How about at Nashville State? What were your priorities? And is there 1 or 2 priorities where you'd particularly like to highlight how you took advantage of this flexibility?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Bush that the flexibility was very helpful, that we could sort of apply the funds where it was relevant to our college. We had a very low number of online classes at the time. That wasn't really our primary way of educating our students. So we put a large amount of the funding in converting as many of our classes to online, or as we call them, web classes, as we could. So we focused a lot of resources, not only in compensating faculty for transferring those courses over to the online format, but also the software and buying all of the equipment that we needed to support that version of the classes. In addition to that, when you think about the two different sides. We have the academic side where they're going to transfer, and then our workforce side where they're going to go straight into the workforce, where we still needed to provide those students who are going straight to the workforce some opportunity for that hands-on, that practical that they were getting in the classroom, because they have 2 years to be ready to go. So when we think about some of our STEM areas where there's hands-on, the engineering department, our advanced manufacturing department, we were able to implement some different types of software associated with some of the hands-on stuff when we were not on campus, where those students could remotely access the equipment that they needed or use simulation so that they still get that hands-on experience. So we were able to purchase the software needed for that and some of the hardware that was associated so that our students who weren't transferring, a lot of the web classes or online classes were associated with our transfer students. But for those students who were going straight to work, they still got that hands-on training that they needed in those classes. And then also our science classes in terms of anatomy and physiology or biology, for example, just getting more equipment that allowed us, the students, to social distance or to have that space, or to take those classes online if they were isolating, and to still be able to use virtual labs and things like that, that would still give them that experience, that hands-on. So that was very beneficial to us.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come back in a few minutes with another question about the online instruction, so please hold those thoughts. Dr. Villanueva, we'd love to hear from you about your priorities and how did you at Lee College try to take advantage of the flexibility?
So the one thing that I wanted to talk about is how we offered free tuition. And so I'd like to discuss, though, how Lee College was a bit of an anomaly at the time. And I want to remind everyone, and I think that everyone will remember, that back in April of 2020, when we were first dispersed the funds, there was complete and total mass confusion in how the funds could be used. So it was unclear whether we could provide funds to particular students. Did we have to be Pell eligible? Did our students have to have a FAFSA on file? Could you be an undocumented student and receive relief? What kinds of eligibility criteria could an institution impose, or were we required to impose? And we just didn't know. We didn't know if we could pay students tuition across the board. And we kind of took a reasoned risk, and we got the money out the door as soon as possible when we were then facing a 50% decline in enrollment as we were facing the summer. So we gave the money to everyone who signed up for classes in the summer. And regionally and statewide, this was just not the practice. So people were generally conservative, and as our colleagues talked about, a lot of them used the money to cover lost revenues. This was safe, but I would argue that it ended up hurting a lot of students. And our mantra was to do every single thing that we could to ensure that our students just did not delay their educational goals. And it was absolutely effective for us. We went from being 50% down in enrollment to then being 46% above the previous year's enrollment. So while tuition, that free tuition has definitely been helpful, once those HERE rules, though, became clearer, the rules around student funding were then actually hostile to using the funds to grow enrollment. So we still wanted to provide tuition and free books, but we couldn't make funding contingent on taking classes or needing the books. So the best we could then do was ask students if they wanted to use their HERE funding to pay for their tuition and books. And ultimately, we used those lessons that we learned from that summer of free tuition, and we created a new tuition incentive program that is not now based upon HERE funding.
Let me just stick with that, because that was a very bold move that you took at Lee College. And so this question of sustainability and how would you keep this? You have a group of students who have perhaps grown accustomed to having their tuition covered. So can you say more about how you've been able to keep that going at Lee College, and what is your current strategy?
So Lee College has institutionalized that, essentially that program of providing students who are now new to the college, including our dual credit students who return to Lee College when they graduate, and we offer them free tuition, fees, and books in a program that we are now calling First Time Free at Lee. And the program has been extremely successful in terms of enrollment growth, as we've now experienced 2 fall semesters of record enrollment in the college's then 88-year and 89-year history. And fingers crossed, knock on wood, I don't know if my desk is wood or not, but we are hoping that, and it's looking like we might experience another all-time record in enrollment, and that would then be in our college's now 90-year history.
Congratulations on that. I think many colleges around the country will be interested in learning more from your experience. Dr. Williams, let's go back to you. This whole issue of kind of having to switch over to online instruction, it was done very quickly by your college, by other colleges around the country. And certainly when the pandemic hit, I think the general view in the field was that in-person instruction was a lot more effective, that students were more interested in in-person instruction than online. Tell us about the feeling at your campus now, and what are students asking for now? Do they prefer to be in person? Do they want to be online? Are they looking for a mix? How are you managing these different expectations?
Yes, it was a pretty dramatic change in the beginning. Once again, we had a pretty low number of online classes. And so there's a lot of training involved. We had to train our faculty about instructing those classes, also provide training to students on using the learning management systems and all of that solely for all of their classwork. So there was a lot of training that we had to do there. And once again, a lot of equipment. Dr. Bush talked about earlier, the loaner laptops, the loaner internet hotspots, things like that, that you have to provide to students so that they are able to access their classes. Pre-pandemic, we had probably about 22% of our classes online, 22% of students taking online classes, and now it's about 55%. It's still a very, very much preferred by students. They do like the mix. They do like the on-campus classes as well. We have some virtual, but there are a large number of requests for our online classes. And so we're still continuing to build those out and to develop new online classes, even though the funding has ended. We can't do it as massively as we did it before, but we're still slowly adding online classes because there's quite a bit of demand for it. We also noticed it changed. We have a large number of adult students at Nashville State. About 44 of our students are 25 plus. And so prior to the pandemic, they were more of the student body that were interested in online classes. But now we see a lot more of our traditional students who are interested in online and web classes as well. So it's been a transition, but it's been a very popular move.
And if I may stick with you just another moment, I was very intrigued by what you had to say about using online courses and applications to provide simulations of the kinds of work skills students need to learn in their particular fields of study. Are there some subject areas where you found that kind of online simulation works better than others? Have you been able perhaps to expand the number of students who really get a good simulated or experiential kind of learning through this mechanism? Here again, I know there's a lot of interest around the country in this idea.
Yeah, and a lot of our workforce programs now, as soon as we were able to bring them back, the students came back into the classroom because that hands-on was pretty critical, but we did retain some options in our engineering classes, for example, where students can access the trainers remotely. That is not as easy as the other classes that were converted when you think about the sciences and the labs and making sure that they still get that same experience. So that required a little bit more training, a lot more creativity, looking for virtual resources that could be incorporated in the classes because it's more popular now than it was then when we first started. So it's easier to find now. But we find that some of our workforce, the engineering, the architecture, the construction, those hands-on things, a lot of those things we did bring back to the classroom when we could.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Bush, love to hear more from you about this conversion to online instruction and services at Cosumnes River College. What did things look like before the pandemic? And what do they look like now? How are you managing perhaps these different expectations students have and perhaps the desire for having lots of options? Can you meet those demands or expectations?
Yeah, I think we will have to, whether we want to or not. I think the student demand is really dictating how we're moving as a institution. So of course, I mean, our story is very similar. 10% roughly of our courses were online prior to the pandemic. most of our services students had to come face to face to complete, such as doing counseling appointments. And so all that changed dramatically during the pandemic. So now 55% roughly of our courses are on ground, 45% are online. But when we look at our fill rates, asynchronous online courses have the highest fill rates when we release our schedule. So the demand is still skewing towards online courses, even though we're trying to make a concerted effort to have a robust on-ground presence as well. I mean, one of the things that is a challenge for us institutionally is that all of our student experiences are not the same. And so when we talk about our students gravitating to online space, what is the implication, particularly for populations that have not done well, our institutions have not served them well when they enrolled in class? And no surprise, it's the same student population where there's equity gaps in face-to-face courses as well. So part of the effort in our conversion, once we hit kind of the initial urgency of doing faculty development and just converting those who are much more comfortable or never taught in an online space to be able to be equipped to do so, the next stage of that work in professional development had to quickly pivot around how to create more culturally relevant online pedagogy or andragogy, how to consider those who have already been historically disadvantaged with our institution to make sure that they are not further harmed during the pandemic, or as we consider their ability to convert to online classes. And that's still a work in progress. So similarly, as we have to focus on teaching and learning and eliminating achievement gaps pre-pandemic, now we have the added complexity of being able to do that regardless of modality. So focus effort, not just on training faculty around teaching in an online environment, but to hold space and keep in mind for the type of students that they're serving and look at different instructional practices that would be more conducive to all of the students in which we serve. And so that is something that we have keyed in on and will continue to key in on as we move forward, and particularly as many of our students' preference don't necessarily match the expected outcomes of success. And how do we reconcile those two things as an institution is something that we will have to continue to consider.
Just out of curiosity, do your staff or faculty try to counsel students ever that perhaps they would do better in an in-person class? Is that a position you take as an institution, or is it really left more up to the student to make that decision?
Some of both, right? So the students we are able to get to, as you know, sometimes that could just be a challenge. We do make recommendations for students who we think would do better in on-ground environments. What we're seeing, and I think was mentioned by Dr. Williams, that students really have a mix. So it's not a situation where our students will say, I'm going to be 100% online or 100% on ground. I think they look at their own skill set for a particular subject and say, well, for this class, for this math course, I want to take this on ground because I'm not as confident in math, but for my psychology class, I'm quite comfortable doing that online. So we see a mixed approach based on students' belief or how well they can do based on the modality and their level of confidence in a particular subject. So yes, but also some students just choose convenience over the probability of success in a particular course.
Dr. Villanueva, I'd love to give you a chance to get in on that question. What approach does your college take? Do you just take what the student wants to do, or is there active advising, counseling around issues like modality that Dr. Bush just mentioned?
So I feel like just saying ditto and amen to Dr. Bush. I mean, just pretty much covered what I think, we try to do and address kind of the same issues that we have. And I would say, I think Dr. Williams might have mentioned this as well, or both, that we had a very just poor and limited amount of online course offerings that were available to students prior to the pandemic. It was about 15%, and we've over doubled that now. But the shift has primarily affected general academic courses and not technical, and that kind of makes sense because like we found like you really can't teach welding online. So that was kind of a Band-Aid approach for us in the very beginning of the pandemic. And we have seen that there's been an enrollment increase in online courses for both Hispanics and African Americans, but we have looked at that data and it's difficult for us to say whether it's a function of modality or not, or if it's just based on an increase in enrollment in general. But we've really prioritized what we, I don't know if everyone else calls it the same thing, but we have these high flex classrooms, which allow for student choice. And so the student can take the classes in person, they can do it online, virtual, or they can even watch a recording. So we used our funding from the HERE funds to create 13 of those high flex classrooms, and that has been a real game changer for us. But again, I would say ditto to my colleagues.
Thank you. So I'll ask one more question and also invite people who are watching the webinar to enter any questions they may have, either for our panelists or for the researchers into the chat. And we'll try to get to those as well. So for my last question, Dr. Williams, if I may turn to you first, our survey indicated that many colleges were really concerned about their ability to address students' emergency cash needs, as well as their mental health needs once the federal money goes away. Can you just speak briefly to your campus experience, and are you finding ways to address those needs absent the federal money?
Yeah, we did use the federal funds for both, for mental health and just the wraparound service resources for students. We did contract out with some mental health companies to offer students that. When the funding ran out, we maintained it a while for the college, and then we found like a local nonprofit that offers it for us now. So it's something that we definitely use the HERE funds for, and then looked for different variety of ways to maintain that. The same is true for the wraparound services, the support the students need. We're always looking for ways to do that. We have some local and state funding that we use to support students in that way. We'll turn to the foundation at times if necessary. But those were two very crucial, I think, services that we got from the funding that we really work hard to maintain now.
Thank you. Dr. Bush, over to you. Same question. Emergency cash needs, mental health needs. What's the situation at Cosumnes?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely made sure that students receive direct aid, but in part of the sustainability effort, like I mentioned with the zero textbooks, was to identify other ways in which we could relieve financial burden for students. And so that's why the focus on the savings that students receive by not having books. I failed to mention that we save students now upwards of $10 million since we've been doing the work. And so that's real money in the hands of students. So that is a form of direct aid. So students were having to make the decision whether to repair their car or to buy a book or to buy groceries or to buy their book. So we wanted to eliminate, that type of choices or decisions that students would make, because they often opted to fix their car and to buy groceries and try to get through the course absent of buying a book or dropping out all together. So that was important. With mental health, we continue our commitment. Similar to Dr. Williams, we contracted out with telehealth services to be able to provide online and on the ground support for mental health. Since the pandemic, we've been able to use general funding and other money, braiding other dollars to provide more mental health practitioners at our institution. But we can't add enough. As soon as we add and make it available, we see that many of our students are immediately taking advantage of that. So that's an area that we continue to have to look at to see how we could sustain and meet the mental health needs of our student population.
That certainly mirrors what we saw in the survey and what we've been hearing just informally from colleges we speak to around the country. Dr. Villanueva, how about at Lee College? Are you able to address emergency cash needs, mental health needs? What are your concerns going forward?
So we, similar to my colleagues, we absolutely use the funds to support emergency aid and mental health. But at the time, we were also fortunate to have been a recipient of a $5 million unrestricted Mackenzie Scott gift. And so we use those funds to create what we call the Student Resource and Advocacy Center. And it's a center focused on addressing students' unmet basic needs. That's the biggest priority. So in it, we've created the largest community college food pantry in the state of Texas, and we think maybe even in the nation. We haven't found one that's bigger. Not that we like to brag about things being bigger in Texas or anything, but that's just kind of how it is. But it has a clothing closet, emergency aid, and a slew of other resources. And it's integrated, though, with other student services like our first year experience program, student activities, tutoring, and financial literacy programs. It's built to be a family-friendly space, as many of our students are also parents, and so we have family-friendly study spaces. But because so many of us, including our students, suffered from crippling mental health challenges, we at the time hired a full-time licensed clinical counselor, which again, my colleagues have already talked about, just doesn't even scratch the surface. So we then also have used Timely Care, a telehealth service, to provide online health care. So in our area, we are in Houston, we're the fourth largest uninsured, have the fourth highest uninsured rate in the nation. So we're providing our students with immediate access to physicians and mental health care providers through Timely Care, and they're really taking advantage of that. And we just think it's been a real game changer for us.
Thank you for that. And it's inspiring to hear what you've been able to do at Lee College. Just quickly around your food pantry and this wonderful resource that you've established on campus. What funding are you using to pay for that? Is that reliant on contributions? Is there state funding? How are you keeping that going?
Institutional funds now. We're institutionalizing it, but obviously our foundation has also been a generous amount of help. And in my role as kind of being the chief storytelling officer, it's my job to talk about who we serve. And when I meet with funders, we talk a lot about that being a need. And in fact, we just learned a couple of days ago that one of our benefactors who gave us, I think it was $883,000 that he wanted, and this is very unlike what would have happened before, 25% of that to go directly to unmet basic needs. And so that is, showing the shift in addressing unmet basic needs and using that support in that manner.
Thank you so much. I love that designation, Chief Storyteller. I think each of you, Dr. Bush, Dr. Williams, Dr. Villanueva, you do that very well. Thank you for sharing your stories with us today. We're just about at the end of time, and I've not seen any questions arise in the chat. But for anyone watching, please feel free to email us with questions, comments. The two reports that we've spoken about, again, are available on our website. If you Google ARC Network, you will find all of the publications that have been published to date through this IES funded program. Thank you so much for your time and attention. We've enjoyed speaking with you.